Hello, I'm Kaiser and welcome to Moose Reads. Before I get started, I want to say that the opinions that I give here are my own opinions. They are extremely subjective. If I dislike a book, it is not a reflection on the author and it is not a reflection on people who do like it. Different people have different tastes, and that's okay. Today, I will be reviewing Lord Brocktree by Brian Jacques. This is the 13th book released in the Redwall series, but first chronologically. It is a fantasy novel. The description says, Salamandastron, under the guardianship of Old Lord Stonepaw, is under threat from an enemy of immense and terrifying power. Ungot Tron, the wild cat who can make the stars fall from the sky, has attacked with his blue hordes and is determined that the fortress should be his. The mountain's defenses are weak, and it seems that nothing can stand in his way. Nothing, that is, but the badger Lord Brocktree, who is drawn to Salamandastron by an undeniable sense of duty. But if he is to rescue the mountain from Tron and his verminous hordes, he must gather about him an army capable of defeating them in battle. Together with the irrepressible hair-maid Dottie and a host of brave creatures, Brocktree journeys to Salamandastron to fulfill his destiny. So when I was a very small child, in 4th or 5th grade, I found a copy of Martin the Warrior in my school library. You can probably see the cover above me. It's got a mouse wielding a sword. That was pretty much a guaranteed read for little me. So I read it, and I loved it, and it turned out it was part of a series. So I started reading that and loved the rest of them. I got pretty far in the series. There are 22, and I bought 13 of them. I didn't read all the ones I bought. I got halfway through the Long Patrol, book 11, and got distracted. Probably I got a little tired of the hares, honestly. At any rate, I finished neither collecting the books nor reading the series. Part of my long-term reading plan is to get through all of the physical books I own, and another part is finishing the series I start unless they are unfinished or I decide I hate them. So reading Redwall is on the list. I reread the book actually titled Redwall, which is the first book published and the 9th book chronologically, either sometime last year or at the beginning of this one, before I started keeping track of my reading properly. I liked it well enough, but wasn't really excited to read the second book, so I read the prologue, put it down, and moved on to other books instead. I decided this year to attempt the 2024 Read Your Bookshelf Challenge, which I will make a video for. But one of the January prompts is to read a book with a cat on the cover. As it turns out, I do not own any books with a cat on the cover. At least, not the front cover. I did, however, discover that there is a cat on the back cover of book 2/3, Mossflower. Deciding this was close enough, I put Mossflower on the plan for January. But I also decided I wanted to read Redwall in chronological order rather than publication order, which meant I needed to read Lord Brocktree and Martin the Warrior first. Okay, series preamble over. Let's get to the actual review. I'll give Lord Brocktree 3 stars. It's kind of approaching the 2-star range. I liked it, I didn't love it. If this had been the first book I read in the series as a kid, I doubt I would have gone farther. And that is probably an important thing to note. If you have never read any Redwall books and think you might like to, do not start with Lord Brocktree. Other people will probably tell you to start with Redwall, which I suppose is serviceable, but not my recommendation. Redwall was Jake's first foray into the world he created, and it has some things that aren't found anywhere else in the series, and just isn't the strongest entry. It's fine, I liked it well enough, even the second time through, but it's not where I would start. Personally, I would recommend starting with Martin the Warrior, and then reading chronologically, but I admit to my biases. Interestingly, when I looked up the chronological reading order, several lists put Lord Brocktree much later in the series. I don't know why. It very clearly takes place before the Abbey is built and before Martin starts being a warrior, so it obviously goes at the start. The reason I say you shouldn't start here, however, is twofold. First, it feels very much like a book written to answer a few lore questions, which new readers obviously won't care or even know about. Second, this is one of very few Redwall books that focuses more on the hares and the badgers than the other critters, which gives kind of a different vibe. A lot of other critters are in it, otters primarily, but shrews and hedgehogs, and one mole consistently, but they are mostly secondary characters. There is not a mouse to be found, which is very uncharacteristic of the series. Okay, second big issue. Jacques is one of those authors who writes accents. He was a British author, and each different species in his world has a different accent, which is spelled out as it is pronounced. This has never bothered me, or even been a problem for me, but I know it drives some people nuts, and I also know that some of the accents can be a bit harder to parse. If you're thinking about picking up the series, I would read a few pages of prologue somewhere to be sure you're cool with this style. In particular, check how you feel about the moles. They will be in every book, and they are one of the trickier accents to grasp in the way they are written. As for my specific thoughts on this particular book, well, as I said before, this is one that focuses more on the hares and the badgers, and I'm not over fond of the hares. In general, they are the animal I find the most obnoxious. It's been quite a while since I read any of these books, so it's hard to say for sure, but I believe Lord Brocktree has one of the worst examples of this, and he's the main character for at least a quarter of the book. If you've read it, or plan to and are curious, I'm talking about Fleet Scut. I'll get into that a bit more later. I also think this book suffered a little from my personal expectations. For those unfamiliar with the series, on the western coast of the continent there is a dead volcano called Salamandastron. Throughout the series, we encounter various hares that hail from there, and occasionally a badger lord that rules there. I was always under the impression that Lord Brocktree was an origin story for this mountain, and I was at least mildly curious about that story. But that is not what the story is. It makes some noise in that direction. The framing device is one of the later Badger Lords telling the story of his ancestor, and he says that Lord Brocktree fundamentally changed the way Salamandastron operated. But that isn't really what I was expecting, and in all honesty, mostly feels like bullshit. We don't actually spend much time with Salamandastron prior to Brocktree coming to rule it, so it's hard to say exactly what life was like there before he took over, but there's only one thing that I can point to at the end of the book that is appreciably different. It's not entirely fair to hold my expectations against the book. I know that. But at the same time, I feel at least mildly justified. Like I said, it does make some noise in that direction. But also, and this is the more important thing, it didn't bother to correct me until I read it. Mild tangent here, but my copy of this book does not have a synopsis anywhere on it. The entire back cover is just a picture of the author. As a general rule, if you're publishing a book, you should tell readers what it's about. Reads with Rachel has a pretty good video about this topic, but the plot summary is one of the 3 most important parts of selling your book. This book doesn't tell me what it's about, so it can't complain when I fundamentally misunderstand what to expect. At any rate, it was a perfectly fine fantasy animal novel. It just wasn't my favorite. But I'll say that's it for no spoilers. If you don't want spoilers for this book, now is the time to pause or close the video. For everyone else, let's get into it. I don't like the hares in general, but damn if Fleet Scut wasn't the most annoying pain in the ass. At the beginning of the book, Ungot Trun attacks Salamandastron. Because they had been living in peace, the younger hares had all gotten restless and wandered off to seek adventure, so only the old hares and the aged Badger Lord are left to defend it. That still amounts to like 170 hares, but Ungot Trun has a truly enormous army, so he wins. Before the battle begins, Lord Stonepaw sends Fleetscut to try to find the younger hares or any other reinforcements to help them hold, or really retake, the mountain. So Fleetscut goes off, and the first people he runs into are a tribe of squirrels led by Juka the Sling. These squirrels are not interested in fighting and dying for a cause that doesn't matter to them, so they decline to help Salamandastron, though they do save Fleetscut from a pursuing patrol. When word comes that Salamandastron has been taken by Ungot-Trun, Fleetscut is, reasonably, upset with them. I don't necessarily blame the squirrels for not wanting to fight a losing battle for Salamandastron, but Fleetscut rightly points out that Ungot-Trun will kill and enslave the entire land once he's settled on his mountain. So to some extent, she's just delaying the inevitable with the excuse of self-interest. So when Fleetscut calls her a coward, I was mostly on his side. But then Juka agrees to go with him and help him find more reinforcements and fight to win back the mountain in return for the right to loot arms and armor from the enemy. And Fleetscut continues to be a complete jackass toward her. He insults her regularly, does not give any respect to her authority as the leader of her people, and complains about every minor inconvenience along the way. I hated him from start to finish, and I didn't feel like he and Juka dying fighting side by side was earned in the least. There's a lot that can be said about the one-dimensional nature of most of the bad guys in this series, but I honestly don't care. Not all villains have to be complicated and realistic, especially in what is arguably a children's series. But I did think that Ungot-Trun was a painfully bad leader, and it made the whole plot a little harder to swallow. Toward the end, when Lord Brocktree and his significantly smaller army are attempting to retake the mountain, two things happen that are just ridiculous from a tactical standpoint. And that's coming from someone whose tactics are almost certainly shit. Earlier in the book, Lord Stonepaw and a dozen hares escape into some tunnels under Salamandastron and end up taking refuge in a cave that is fairly well hidden. They take a while to remember how to get out from there, and by the time they do, the enemy has found their hiding place. Stonepaw goes out in a blaze of glory while the hares escape unseen. Trun then promotes two brand new members of his horde to captains, and has them keep watch while the three officers, now demoted, who were responsible for finding the hares before they escaped, try to find where they went now. One of the three, a fox named Grodil, figures it out. Largely, I suspect, because Stonepaw wrote it down. But rather than tell the two captains, he waits until they are sleeping, convinces the person with him to help him out of their bonds, the third was killed by one of the captains, and escapes. So, Ungot-Trun doesn't know how they got out, but he does know that the exit, and consequently entrance, is somewhere in that cave. But he doesn't bother to search any further or post any kind of watch to ensure no one sneaks back in. I know he doesn't do this, because that's exactly what happens. Stiffener, the hare in charge of the escapees, later leads Lord Brocktree and a contingent of his army into Salamandastron to open the gates for the rest. At this point, Trun has sent most of his army out of the mountain to kill our heroes where he thought they were, so there's only a smallish group defending the gates, which are under siege by the bulk of Brocktree's forces. Or at least, seemingly under siege. Ungot-Trun has blockaded any and all openings, so he can't see what they are doing, only hear. They are hamming it up until Brocktree kills the defenders and opens the door, which is another very obvious mistake on Trun's part. But Trun sends one of his rats to find a second unit for reinforcements. The rat doesn't find the unit, they've already been killed by Brocktree, but he does find Brocktree, and he tells Ungot-Trun about this group of attackers that is rapidly coming to attack his defenders from behind. And rather than inform his few soldiers that the bigger threat is coming up on their rear, He tells them the reinforcements will be there shortly and scarpers off to sneak out a window and find the bulk of his army. So when Brocktree comes crashing down on the horde beasts defending the gate, they are taken completely by surprise. I understand that Trun had to lose, so obviously he was going to be outsmarted. But the way things played out, it didn't seem like outsmarting him was all that hard. If you're going to give me one-dimensional villains, at least make them feel like a proper threat. And lastly, there's a setup and payoff issue, at least in my opinion. Before Angatron even takes Salamandastron, there's a line where Jacques says that Grodil, the fox that I mentioned before, gives Angatron a look of pure hatred while his back is turned, which I took to mean he would eventually betray him. And then later he escapes, so now he has the opportunity for said betrayal. But he just disappears entirely after that. Technically, he does get his betrayal in at the last moment, but it felt cheap. See, Lord Brocktree challenges Angatron to single combat. Trun obviously tries to cheat, but it doesn't work out for him, and he is soundly beaten. Brocktree crushes his spine and has his body tossed in the ocean. But then we get a little bonus scene where Trun isn't dead, and he washes up on a beach somewhere. And hey, Grodil just happens to be there too. But Grodil doesn't even, stab him or anything. He just kicks him back into the ocean where he presumably drowns. Like I said, technically this is a proper setup and payoff, but I already thought Angatron was dead, so bringing him back so that Grodil could half-ass his revenge didn't feel like a satisfying payoff. It just felt cheap. Anyway, that's all I really have to say about this book. It was fine, it wasn't my favorite. I'm still going to continue working my way through the series. If you like this video, I hope you'll watch more in the future. Thanks for watching this one. Bye.